My name is Adeline, and at 42, I find myself living a life far removed from the carefree dreams of my youth. My days are a relentless cycle, split between my clerical job and the dwindling family liquor store, a once thriving establishment now teetering on the edge of ruin. The store, nestled in a cozy corner of our neighborhood, had been the pride of our family for decades. It was a time when our name was synonymous with quality spirits, and our monopoly in the area was unchallenged. But as years passed, strict regulations strangled the nightlife, and our primary clientele, hotel banquet halls, pubs, and restaurants, dwindled to a mere trickle. In the midst of this decline stood my father, Harold, a man stubbornly clinging to the past. His management style, if one could call it that, was a recipe for disaster. Debts mounted, yet he persisted with his outdated methods, blind to the changing world around him. 2 years ago, in a desperate bid to salvage what was left of our legacy, I moved back into my childhood home. The liquor store, struggling to stay afloat, became my evening haunt after office hours. Each day as I stepped through its doors, the familiar jingle of the bell was a stark reminder of the burden I shouldered. "Dad, are you drinking again?" I'd often find him behind the counter, a bottle in hand, his laughter a stark contrast to the store's empty aisles. "Ha, these bottles aren't selling anyway." "Might as well enjoy them," he'd slur, the smell of alcohol heavy in the air. I'd sigh, a mix of frustration and resignation, as I set about cleaning the cluttered store and delving into the books. Our finances were a labyrinth of debts and overdue bills, a testament to years of neglect. Dinner was always a solitary affair, long past 9 p.m., after the day's tasks were done. My parents, lost in their own world, would be asleep, leaving the kitchen and the responsibility of meals to me. Every night, I'd prepare a simple meal, usually instant ramen, and then start prepping for the next morning's breakfast. My mom preferred bread, while Dad was a rice person. It was a small detail, but in our household, even the smallest preferences were my responsibility. Weekends, which should have been my respite, began at the crack of dawn, thanks to my mother, Irene. "Adeline, make your father's miso soup quickly," she'd demand, her voice cutting through any hopes of rest. "Why can't you do that, Mom?" I'd protest, only to be met with her sharp retort. "Why should I have to do the housework when you're here? Now get up." I had always been the meticulous one, the daughter who naturally took on chores and responsibilities. It started in high school, and by the time I graduated, I was the family's backbone. Tired of this endless cycle, I had taken up the office job right after school, hoping to escape. But escape, it seemed, was a luxury I couldn't afford. The liquor store's debts, a staggering $3 million, loomed over us like a dark cloud. Living frugally became second nature to me. $1 cosmetics, homemade lunches, enduring the cold to save on heating, all in a desperate bid to keep us afloat. One day, as I suggested leveraging the internet to boost sales, my father's response was as predictable as it was infuriating. "Our old way is the best way. I'm not the problem, the world is." His words echoed in my head as I juggled household chores with my attempts to rejuvenate the business. There was never enough time, always a step behind, always just out of reach of a solution. But I was determined. Against my father's resistance, I started online classes, selling rare alcohol from our store. This innovative approach was a hit, especially with restrictions limiting people's movements. Slowly, the business picked up. It was a glimmer of hope in an otherwise dark tunnel. But as our store's name gained online visibility, so too did my workload increase. Free time became a distant memory, yet I pushed on, believing it was all for the greater good. That belief, however, was about to be shattered. The rhythm of my life was an unending dance of duty and disappointment. Each day, I awoke to a world where my efforts seemed invisible to those who mattered most. My family's store, once a symbol of pride, had become a chain around my neck, dragging me down into an abyss of resentment and exhaustion. One particularly grueling evening, I found myself sifting through piles of overdue invoices, the numbers blurring before my eyes. The store was silent, save for the occasional clink of a bottle as my father, Harold, indulged in his habitual drinking. "Dad, we can't keep going like this. We're sinking," I said, my voice a mix of despair and frustration. He simply chuckled, his words slurred. "Ah, Adeline, always so serious. Relax, have a drink. It'll all work out." His nonchalance was like a slap in the face. How could he be so blind? The weight of our debts was crushing, and yet there he sat, drowning his sorrows in the very product that was supposed to be our salvation. The following morning, as I prepared breakfast, my mother, Irene, sauntered into the kitchen. "Make sure you clean the house today. Clara and her husband might visit," she ordered, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Clara, my younger sister, was the polar opposite of me. Free-spirited, carefree, she had floated through life on a cloud of whims and desires, always landing softly on the cushion of our parents' support. Even after marrying a man as aimless as herself, she continued to lean on our parents financially. As I scrubbed and cleaned, the bitter thoughts churned in my mind. Why was I the one to bear all this? Why did Clara get to live a life of leisure while I toiled away? Later that day, as Clara breezed into the store, her laughter echoed mockingly off the walls. "Oh, Adeline, still stuck in this old place? You really should get out more," she chided, her words tinged with a carelessness that stung. I bit back a sharp retort, focusing instead on the task at hand. The store, now a little busier thanks to my online efforts, demanded my full attention. But Clara's words lingered, a painful reminder of the life I could have had. That night, as I lay in bed, the exhaustion of my double life weighed heavily on me. My parents' indifference, Clara's thoughtlessness, the endless cycle of work, it was all becoming too much. A voice inside me whispered of change, of breaking free, but fear and duty held me back. The next day brought no respite. As I balanced the accounts, my mother's voice cut through the quiet. "Adeline, when are you going to settle down? You're not getting any younger, you know." I looked up, stunned. Was this really what she worried about? Not our failing business, not the crushing debt, but my marital status? "Maybe when our store isn't on the brink of collapse," I replied curtly, turning back to my work. Her scoff was the only response I received. As days turned into weeks, the strain began to take its toll. Sleepless nights, skipped meals, and constant stress left me worn and weary. But there was no time to rest, no time to breathe. The store, the house, my job, they all demanded more of me than I had to give. It was during one of these endless days that I received the news. Clara was pregnant. The family buzzed with excitement, a stark contrast to the chaos that was our reality. "That's great, the first grandchild," I managed to say, a forced smile on my lips. But my mother's next words were like a cold splash of water. "That's why you need to leave the house." I stared at her, disbelief and anger warring within me. "What? Why?" "You need to make room for Clara and her family," my father added, his tone dismissive. I was speechless. After everything I had done, sacrificed, endured, this was how they repaid me? A cold, unceremonious dismissal? The injustice of it burned my chest, a fire that threatened to consume me. But in that moment, something shifted within me. A resolve, steel and unwavering, took root. I would leave, but on my terms, and they would soon realize the true cost of their ingratitude. The decision to leave my childhood home, the epicenter of my lifelong sacrifices, didn't come easy. Yet, as I packed my belongings, each item I tucked away felt like a shard of the heavy chain I was shedding. The house, once a sanctuary of family memories, had morphed into a prison of ungrateful demands and unreciprocated toil. In the midst of my packing, my father Harold stumbled in, reeking of liquor. "What's this? Planning a little trip?" he sneered, his voice dripping with derision. I straightened up, meeting his bleary eyes with a calm I didn't feel. "I'm moving out," I stated, the words tasting like freedom. His reaction was a bitter laugh. "Moving out? And who's going to run the store? Cook and clean? You think you're irreplaceable?" His words, meant to wound, only strengthened my resolve. "You'll have to figure that out, won't you?" I replied, turning back to my packing. The following days were a whirlwind of activity. Amidst the chaos of moving and handling my office work, I still found myself drawn back to the liquor store, the pull of responsibility too ingrained to ignore. One evening, as I was tidying up the store for what felt like the last time, Clara breezed in, her carefree demeanor unchanged. "So you're really leaving us, huh?" she asked, her voice light, almost mocking. I paused, a myriad of emotions swirling within me. "Yes, Clara, I am. Someone else can shoulder the burdens now." Her laughter was a cold echo in the empty store. "Oh, Adeline, always the martyr. Don't worry, I'm sure we'll manage without you." Her words, meant to belittle, only fueled the fire in my heart. My family's true colors were glaringly evident now, selfish, uncaring, and utterly blind to the sacrifices made in their name. The night before my departure, as I sat amidst boxes of my life, a sense of surreal calm enveloped me. The years of being the dependable daughter, the responsible sister, were coming to an end. But as I looked around the room, a wave of sadness hit me. This was the home where I grew up, where I laughed and cried, where I dreamed of a future that was never mine. My mother, Irene, appeared at my door, her expression unreadable. "You don't have to do this, Adeline. We need you here." Her words, so devoid of understanding, stung. "No, Mom, you needed me. You just never realized it." The day I left, the house was silent, an eerie testament to the void I was leaving behind. My parents stood by, their expressions a mix of confusion and resentment, as I loaded the last of my things into the car. As I drove away, the familiar streets of my childhood receded in the rearview mirror. I felt a pang of loss, but more than that, a burgeoning sense of relief. I was leaving behind a life of thankless servitude, stepping into a future where my worth wasn't measured by the sacrifices I made for others. But as the distance between me and my former life grew, so did my resolve. My family, so accustomed to my constant support, would soon face the harsh reality of their own making, and I, freed from their unappreciative grasp, would finally start living for myself. Settling into my new apartment, a modest but cozy space, I felt the first true breath of freedom I had experienced in years. It was a stark contrast to the burdensome atmosphere of my parents' house. Yet, even in this newfound tranquility, the echoes of my past life haunted me. It wasn't long before the reality of my family's dependence on me became painfully apparent. My phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages from home. Each plea for help, each demand for my return, was a reminder of the suffocating expectations I had escaped. One evening, as I was preparing a simple dinner for myself, my phone lit up with a familiar number. Bracing myself, I answered. It was my father, Harold, his voice slurred and angry. "Adeline, where are you? The store is a mess. We need you here," he barked into the phone. I clenched my jaw, the old feelings of obligation tugging at me. "Dad, I've moved out. You and Clara will have to manage on your own." His response was a string of insults and accusations, blaming me for abandoning the family in their time of need. His words were like daggers, aimed to wound, but I had grown a shield of resolve. "I'm not your crutch anymore, Dad. You'll have to stand on your own," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The days that followed were a relentless barrage of guilt trips and emotional blackmail. My mother, Irene, played her part well, lamenting how I could leave my family in such dire straits. "You're being selfish, Adeline. Think about what you're doing to us," she implored during one of her many calls. But the years of neglect and underappreciation had hardened my heart. "I've thought about it for far too long, Mom. Now, it's time for me to think about myself." Amidst this tumult, I found solace in my work and the few friends I had kept at a distance over the years. Among them was Marcus, a colleague from the office who had always been kind, but whom I had never allowed myself to get close to. One day, after a particularly grueling call with my mother, Marcus noticed my distress. "Adeline, you okay? You've been looking really stressed lately," he said, his concern genuine. I hesitated, then decided to open up. "It's just family stuff. I recently moved out, and they're not taking it well." Marcus listened intently, offering a sympathetic ear and words of encouragement. His kindness was a balm to my weary soul. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen and understood. But the reprieve was short-lived. The stress of juggling my new life, the constant barrage from my family, and the lingering guilt took its toll. One day at work, as I sat at my desk, the room began to spin. The last thing I remember was Marcus's voice calling my name before everything went black. I awoke in a hospital bed, my head throbbing with pain. Marcus was there, his face etched with worry. "You gave us quite a scare, Adeline. You collapsed and hit your head. How are you feeling?" Tears welled up in my eyes, not from the pain, but from the overwhelming sense of care and concern I had been denied for so long. "Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what to say." Marcus squeezed my hand gently. "Don't say anything. Just focus on getting better. And maybe, when you're ready, think about making some changes. You can't keep going like this." His words resonated deep within me. For so long I had lived for others, neglecting my own well-being. It was time to make a change, to live for myself. As I lay in that hospital bed, the realization hit me hard. My family's selfishness and dependence had nearly broken me. But now, I was on the path to healing and self-discovery, and I was determined to not let anyone pull me back into the abyss from which I had just crawled out. Recovering from the incident at work, I found myself at a crossroads. Marcus's words echoed in my mind, urging me to change the trajectory of my life. It was time to prioritize my health and happiness over the never-ending demands of my family. The decision was made. I would no longer be at the beck and call of my parents and Clara. This newfound resolve, however, did not stop the onslaught of calls and messages, each more desperate and manipulative than the last. One evening, as I sifted through my mail, a call from my mother, Irene, came through. Her voice was shrill, laced with panic and anger. "Adeline, you need to come back. The store is failing without you. We're struggling to keep up." Her plea was a twisted symphony of guilt and blame. "You're responsible for this mess. You can't just abandon your family." I felt a surge of anger, but it was quickly replaced by a steely calm. "No, Mom, I'm not responsible for the years of mismanagement and neglect. You and Dad made your bed. Now you have to lie in it." Her response was a mix of incredulous outrage and desperate bargaining, but I stood firm. The chains of guilt and obligation had been broken. As days turned into weeks, the frequency of their calls diminished, replaced by a foreboding silence. I immersed myself in my work and started exploring hobbies I had long neglected. Life was beginning to have a semblance of normalcy and peace. Then, one day, a call from Clara jolted me back to reality. Her voice was hysterical, a stark contrast to her usual carefree tone. "Adeline, you have to help us. The store is on the brink of closure. We're drowning in debt." Her words were laced with panic and a hint of realization of the gravity of their situation. But it was too late. "Clara, I warned you all. I can't fix years of mistakes and neglect. You need to figure it out," I replied, my voice void of the sympathy she sought. The call ended with Clara's sobs and pleas echoing in my ears, but they no longer had the power to sway me. My family had to face the consequences of their actions, the result of years of taking my efforts for granted. Weeks passed, and the inevitable news arrived. The family liquor store, once a cornerstone of our neighborhood, had closed its doors for good. The failure of the business was a harsh blow to my parents and Clara, a bitter taste of reality they had long avoided. I heard through mutual acquaintances about the chaos that ensued. My parents, unable to cope with their new reality, were consumed by blame and regret. Clara and her husband, faced with the harshness of responsibility, were at a loss, their illusory world shattered. There was a part of me that felt vindicated, seeing them finally reap what they had sown. But there was also a pang of sadness for what could have been if only they had appreciated and reciprocated my efforts. As I reflected on these events, I realized this was not just the end of the family business, but the end of a chapter in my life, a chapter filled with sacrifice and unacknowledged labor. Now it was time to write a new story, one where I was the protagonist of my own life. Life in my new world, unshackled from the chains of familial obligation, was a revelation. My days, once dictated by the whims and needs of my parents and Clara, were now my own. I relished the freedom, the ability to make decisions for myself without the cloud of guilt and manipulation that had hovered over me for so long. But even in this newfound paradise, the specter of my old life occasionally intruded. One day, as I was enjoying a quiet evening at home, my phone rang with an all-too-familiar number. The sight of it stirred a mix of irritation and curiosity. Bracing myself, I answered. It was my mother, Irene, her voice tinged with desperation. "Adeline, you have to come back. We're in trouble. The debt collectors are after us." Her plea, once capable of dragging me back into the mire, now fell on deaf ears. "Mom, I've told you before. I can't help you. You need to sort this out yourselves." "But we're your family. How can you abandon us like this?" she cried, the audacity of her words almost laughable. "Family?" I retorted, my voice cold. "The same family that took my efforts for granted, that kicked me out when I was no longer convenient? I think you've mistaken me for someone else." The line went dead, her silence more telling than any words could be. They were finally starting to understand the gravity of their situation, the consequences of their actions. Over the next few weeks, news of my family's plight trickled in through various channels. The once proud owners of the neighborhood liquor store were now pariahs, weighed down by debt and shunned by those they had once considered friends. My sister Clara, who had never known a day of hard work, was now facing the harsh realities of life. Her husband, equally inept at dealing with adversity, was no support. Their marriage, built on convenience and financial dependence, was crumbling under the strain. I heard about their heated arguments, their desperate attempts to find easy ways out, and their incessant blaming of each other for their downfall. It was a pitiful sight, yet a part of me felt a sense of poetic justice. They were finally experiencing a fraction of the hardships I had endured for their sake. But it was during a chance encounter at a local cafe that the full extent of their decline became apparent. Seated at a corner table, I saw my parents, haggard and worn. They were arguing, their voices a mix of anger and despair. I watched unseen as they laid bare the years of mismanagement and selfish decisions that had led to their undoing. The sight was sobering. This was the family I had left behind, a family that had never valued me until I was gone. Their downfall was of their own making, a direct result of their actions and choices. As I left the cafe, a sense of closure washed over me. I had moved on, built a life where I was valued and appreciated. The echoes of my past, though still lingering, were just that, echoes. They no longer had the power to dictate my life or my happiness. The chapter of my life, defined by thankless sacrifice and unreciprocated loyalty, was closed. Ahead lay a path of self-discovery and fulfillment, a journey I was eager to embark on. The days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, each passing moment affirming my decision to step away from the life that had once threatened to suffocate me. I had created a world for myself, a sanctuary where respect and self-care were not just ideals, but realities. In this new life, I found joy in the small things. The quiet mornings, the leisurely walks, the books I had always wanted to read but never had the time for. My job, once a mere escape from the chaos at home, now became a source of fulfillment and growth. It was during this period of tranquility that Marcus, my colleague who'd been a pillar of support, became more than just a friend. Our shared experiences at work and his unwavering kindness during my tumultuous times blossomed into a deep, meaningful relationship. One crisp autumn evening, as we walked through the park, Marcus stopped, his eyes locking with mine. "Adeline, you've changed so much since we first met. You're stronger, happier. I'm glad I've been a part of this journey with you." His words, simple yet profound, filled my heart. "Marcus, you've been my rock. I don't think I could have made it through without you." As we stood there, amidst the falling leaves, a profound sense of contentment enveloped me. I had come so far from the woman who lived only to serve the whims of her ungrateful family. However, the echoes of my past were not completely silenced. News about my family still reached me, each update a grim reminder of their continuous downward spiral. The once thriving liquor store was now a forgotten relic, its doors permanently shut. My parents, stripped of their pride and business, were a shadow of their former selves, embroiled in a never-ending cycle of blame and regret. Clara and her husband, having lost their financial safety net, were adrift in a sea of their own making. Their frivolous lifestyle, once sustained by my efforts, was now a distant memory. It was during one of my visits to the local market that I overheard a conversation about them. "Have you heard about the family that used to run the liquor store? It's a sad story. They lost everything, even their home," a woman said to her companion, shaking her head. "Yes, I heard. They say the daughter who used to do everything for them left and everything fell apart," the other replied, a tone of sympathy in her voice. I walked past them, a sense of vindication mixed with a tinge of sadness. My family had reaped what they sowed, a harsh lesson in the value of gratitude and hard work. But their fate was no longer my burden. I had released myself from the chains of their expectations and neglect. My life was now my own, a canvas on which I was free to paint my future. As I looked forward to my life with Marcus, a sense of hope and excitement filled me. We had plans, dreams to chase, a future to build together. The scars of my past would always be a part of me, but they no longer defined me. In the end, the greatest revenge was not the downfall of those who had wronged me, but the life I had built in spite of them. A life of happiness, love, and fulfillment. A life truly worth living. You're useless, Layla. Absolutely useless, Ronan sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. I fought back the tears stinging my eyes, refusing to show weakness in front of his family. 7 months pregnant, I had felt a wave of dizziness wash over me and needed to sit down. Instead of concern, my husband's reaction was filled with disdain. Look at her, can't even stand up straight carrying my child. Ronan's parents, Mason and Lila, remained stone-faced, offering no defense. The rest of the family averted their eyes, an uncomfortable silence filling the room. It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner, bringing the extended family together before the baby's arrival. But like most family gatherings, it became another exhibition of Ronan's cruelty towards me. Your grandchild, I corrected him sharply. Or did you forget I'm carrying your daughter? Ronan rolled his eyes. If it was a son, it might actually be worth something. Gasps rippled through the room, but Ronan seemed unfazed by his callous remark. I felt a sharp kick from my unborn daughter, as if she could sense her father's indifference. Mustering all my strength, I rose to my feet, steadying myself against the table. How dare you diminish the value of your own child before she's even born? Ronan barked out a laugh. Value? You've contributed nothing of value, Layla. I'm the one who built this family, this company. What have you done besides be a dead weight? His words cut deep, dredging up years of belittling comments, demeaning behavior I had endured. But this time felt different. A line had been crossed. As I looked around at his family's impassive faces, I realized they didn't see me as one of their own, just a vessel for Ronan's heir, at least until he decided I had outlived my use. That's when I caught Sienna's eye from across the room. My sister-in-law offered a subtle nod of solidarity, the hint of a defiant smirk playing across her lips. In that moment, I knew she recognized Ronan's manipulation for what it was, toxic and abusive. You're right, Ronan, I said steadily. I haven't contributed anything of value. I paused, letting the weight of my next words sink in. Not to you, at least. His brow furrowed in confusion as I turned my focus to the rest of the family. But this child, this daughter you've already dismissed, she is valuable. She's my future, a future free from any of you. The room fell into an uneasy hush as I mustered every ounce of conviction. I'm done being treated as worthless. My daughter and I deserve better. With that, I strode out of the room, the dull roar of Ronan's objections fading behind me. A weight had lifted, and for the first time in a long while, I felt in control of my own destiny. The path ahead was uncertain, but no longer would I accept being diminished and devalued. After years of allowing Ronan's toxic presence to define me, I was finally ready to redefine myself and show my daughter what it truly means to be a woman of strength. No more complacency or fear, only determination to rise above. In the days following that fateful dinner, I found myself questioning everything about my marriage to Ronan. His callous disregard for our unborn daughter laid bare the true depths of his cruelty and lack of empathy. This man, who was supposed to be my partner for life, had reduced me to little more than an object, a disposable vessel for producing his heir. But I was done being disposed of. That night, after leaving his vitriolic family behind, I had marched straight to the home office and began digging into our finances. What I uncovered shook me to my core. Evidence of Ronan's rampant financial mismanagement and deceit that spanned years. Hidden offshore accounts, falsified business records, illegal money trails, all carefully obscured. You lying snake, I muttered, poring over the damning documents. Just then I heard the telltale click of his study door opening. Well, look who's still awake burning the midnight oil. Ronan sauntered in, arf thinly veiled derision lacing his words. I figured you'd be too busy wallowing after your little tantrum the other night. My hands trembled with rage, clutching the financial records like a shield. You're one to talk about tantrums. Your own toddler outbursts have funded this. I shoved the documents towards him. Care to explain all this, dear husband? Ronan's eyes widened as he flipped through the incriminating pages. For a split second, panic flashed across his face before his expression contorted into one of snide amusement. Finally did some digging, did you? He chuckled darkly. I'll give you this much. You're not as big of an idiot as I thought. Don't play dumb with me, I spat. I know about the money laundering, the shady business deals, all of it. You've been lying to me from the start. Ronan simply shrugged, unperturbed. So, those were necessary evils to get to where I am now. All you had to do was play the role of the devoted little wife. But you always did have trouble following directions. His brazen admission, devoid of any morsel of guilt or shame, was like a viper's strike to my heart. How could I have been so blind, so utterly naive to the depths of Ronan's moral depravity? You selfish, heartless bastard, I seethed, fists clenched. Did you ever love me at all? Or was I always just a means to an end in your grand game of lies and deceit? A cruel smirk played across his thin lips. Now you're catching on, but you're giving yourself too much credit, pet. You were a convenient accessory, a pretty ornament to adorn my winning success story. Nothing more. White-hot anger flooded my veins as the weight of his treachery washed over me in waves. This man didn't deserve an ounce of my loyalty or affection, not after everything he'd done, all the ways he'd betrayed and belittled me. And in that moment, I made a vow to myself and to my unborn daughter. I would bring this whole rotten edifice crashing down around him. Ronan wanted to see me as worthless, as nothing more than a means to an end. Fine, I would show him just how ruinous being underestimated could be. Rising to my feet, I met his cold stare with white-hot defiance blazing in my eyes. You're going to regret the day you ever crossed me, Ronan. This... I waved the documents with contempt. All of this is going to be your undoing. No more hiding, no more lies. I'm going to make sure everyone sees you for the soulless snake that you truly are. Ronan let out a contemptuous bark of laughter, seemingly unfazed by my declaration of war. But I could see the slightest flicker of uncertainty in those beady eyes of his. Good, the first embers of fear had been stoked. My path was now clear. It was time to rally my forces, gather my allies, and enact the grand unraveling of Ronan Jacobs' carefully cultivated lies. The reversal of his ill-gotten fortunes was going to be deliciously karmic, and I would be the orchestrator of his downfall, just as he had been the architect of my dehumanization. The great game of revenge was only just beginning. In the aftermath of my explosive confrontation with Ronan, I found myself at a crossroads. His web of deceit surrounding the family business was so intricately spun, taking him down would require more than just my resolve. I needed an inside source, an ally with intimate knowledge to counteract his uncle's shadowy machinations. That's when Sienna entered the picture. My sister-in-law had been sidelined by Ronan and the family elders for years, deemed too headstrong and independent for their antiquated tastes. But her marginalization shielded her from their corruption, allowing her to see the rot festering at the core with striking clarity. I reached out to her a few days after discovering Ronan's illicit financial records, suggesting we meet for lunch to catch up. Sienna, ever perceptive, seemed to sense the weight behind my request. "So what's really going on, Layla?" she asked once we were seated at a quiet cafe, her eyes narrowed with cautious curiosity. "This can't just be a social call after what went down at your dad's place." Exhaling slowly, I pulled out the now dog-eared folder and slid it across the table towards her. "See for yourself. Ronan's lies run much deeper than any of us realized." Sienna's brow furrowed as she flipped through the damning pages, her expression oscillating between disbelief and anger. When she finally looked up at me, her green eyes were blazing with righteous fury. "That arrogant, chauvinistic prick," she hissed, slamming the folder shut. "I knew he was a bastard, but this is a new low, even for him." A rueful smile tugged at the corner of my lips. It felt vindicating to have someone finally see Ronan's treachery for what it was. "You and me both. That's why I need your help taking him down." Sienna cocked an eyebrow quizzically. "My help? Why come to me?" "Because you're one of the few people with a frontline view into the family's dealings," I said frankly. "With your insight into their illegal activities, we'd have a better chance of exposing Ronan's lies and watching the whole corrupt edifice crumble." For a long moment, Sienna studied me appraisingly before letting out a bitter chuckle. "Gotta hand it to you. You've got a set of steel ovaries going up against Ronan like this." Her gaze turned flinty, burning with years of repressed resentment towards my husband and his family. "I'm in. It's high time that misogynistic prick got taken down a few pegs." Relief washed over me, knowing I had a co-conspirator, and a fiercely capable one at that. With Sienna's insider knowledge combined with my evidence, we would be an undeniable force to be reckoned with. So what's the plan? She asked, leaning in conspiratorially. How do you want to dismantle this cancer infecting our family? A feral grin spread across my face as I laid out my initial strategy. Lawsuits, information leaks to the press, back-channel communications to law enforcement, nothing was off the table. Like Jenga pieces, we would systematically extract the foundational blocks underlying Ronan's empire until the entire decrepit tower came crashing down around him. Sienna listened intently, offering insights and recommendations along the way. Our partnership was quickly solidifying into a potent alliance, two wronged women joining forces to enact poetic justice. You know there's no turning back after this, right? Sienna cautioned once I finished laying out my plan. Ronan's going to come after us, after you, with everything he has left. I felt my daughter kick insistently from within my womb, as if lending her strength and conviction to my cause. With a resolute nod, I met Sienna's gaze head-on. Let him try, I said, cold determination lacing my voice. I'm done running scared. It's time for Ronan to learn what happens when you back a mother into a corner. Sienna flashed me a wolfish grin, her eyes glinting with feral approval. Well then, let's make that bastard pay. And with that, the gears of our intricately weaved con were set in motion. Ronan's downfall was now inevitable. He just didn't know it yet. With Sienna as my co-conspirator, the wheels were in motion to demolish Ronan's empire of lies and deceit. But exposing him wouldn't be a simple task. We needed to lay the groundwork meticulously, shoring up our defenses while weakening his position through strategic strikes. Over the following weeks, Sienna and I became a well-oiled machine. She provided insider intelligence on the family's illegal dealings, while I leveraged my financial evidence to start building a comprehensive case against Ronan. Money trails, damning documentation, back-channel whispers to law enforcement, everything was falling into place. I also began lining up allies in preparation for the inevitable battle to come. Some were easy to recruit, like Sienna's younger brother Caleb, who had long resented Ronan's boorish behavior. Others were more hesitant, but the weight of the evidence against my husband ultimately proved convincing. This is some heavy stuff, Lay, Jen, my best friend since childhood, muttered as she pored over the paper trail detailing Ronan's fraud. You know he's going to fight this tooth and nail, right? That's the plan, I replied grimly. He's going to realize just how big of a mistake it was underestimating what a woman's scorn can accomplish. Jen shook her head in disbelief. I knew that asshole was a piece of work, but money laundering? Illegal business dealings? Jesus. Her gaze turned serious as she looked up at me. You sure you're ready for the fallout that comes with taking him down like this? He could try to take everything. Your money, the baby. My hand instinctively went to my swollen belly as I felt my daughter shift inside me. That was the entire crux of this mission, wasn't it? To ensure she would never have to suffer the same toxic mistreatment I had endured. To build her a life free of Ronan's poisonous influence. He doesn't get to decide what's best for my child, not anymore, I said firmly. If he wants a war, he's going to get one, and I don't intend to lose. Jen studied me appraisingly for a long moment before giving a resolute nod. Then you've got my full support. Let's take that bastard down. With more allies rallying to the cause, our efforts started bearing fruit. A scathing expose in the local paper cast scrutiny on Ronan's business affairs. Anonymous tips triggered preliminary IRS and SEC investigations. I could sense the walls closing in around him, his confidence gradually fracturing. It all came to a head one evening when Ronan stormed into the house, his face contorted into a mask of frothing rage. You just couldn't leave well enough alone, could you? He snarled, violently slamming his briefcase onto the table. You had to go and poke your nose where it didn't belong. I stared at him impassively, cradling my pregnant belly. That's rich, coming from you. I'm simply bringing your shady dealings into the light. You conniving little bitch! Ronan's sudden roar made me flinch. You think you've won? That you can take everything I've built and destroy it on a whim? He closed the distance between us, his meaty hand gripping my arm in a vice-like grip. I'll bury you before you can take one more step, do you hear me? This family, this life, it's all mine. You're nothing. His spittle flew in my face as I met his crazed stare with steely defiance. We'll see about that. With a disgusted grunt, Ronan shoved me away and stormed out, leaving me to rub the spot where his fingers had dug into my flesh. I felt my daughter kick anxiously, as if she could sense the tension and rage radiating off her father. "Don't worry, sweetie," I murmured, gently rubbing my belly to soothe her. "That's the last time he'll ever get to hurt us." The game was afoot, the battle lines clearly drawn. There would be no turning back now. Ronan's ignorant arrogance had opened the door for his downfall. Soon, very soon, everything he'd schemed and clawed for would be ashes at his feet. And from those ashes, I would rise, his conquering phoenix, mercilessly guiding the path of his self-immolation. Despite Ronan's blustering threats, Sienna and I refused to let up the pressure. With our meticulous groundwork laid over the past weeks, all we needed was the right catalyst to detonate the explosive truth and bring the full force of our retaliation crashing down. That spark arrived in the most unlikely of places, a goddamn family event, of all things. It was one of those obnoxious high society galas the Jacobs clan used for thinly veiled vanity showcasing. A garish display of old money and entitlement under the guise of charity that made my skin crawl. Ronan, desperate to maintain appearances, had all but demanded my attendance, claiming it would soften the growing PR onslaught against him. So there I was, 7.5 months pregnant, squeezed into an uncomfortably tight dress and trotted out like some grotesque show pony to help resuscitate my husband's wilting image. The hypocrisy was galling, but I played along, for now. The night itself was a sordid parade of self-congratulatory speeches and pathetic social climbing, exactly as I'd expected. I found myself growing increasingly lightheaded and nauseous, thanks to a combination of my condition and the sickeningly opulent atmosphere. "Sienna, I need some air," I muttered, struggling to conceal my discomfort. "Being around these vapid vultures is making me ill." "You just say the word and we're out of here," she replied with a reassuring squeeze of my arm. "This whole charade is utter bullshit anyway." Nodding gratefully, I excused myself from the overcrowded ballroom and made my way towards the balcony doors, each step feeling heavier than the last. I was nearly there when a grimy hand clamped around my elbow, whipping me around forcefully. "Just where do you think you're going?" Ronan sneered, his tuxedo hanging open sloppily and his breath reeking of whiskey. "Your little disappearing act is going to make us look bad." I wrenched my arm free from his grasp, defiant anger flaring. "Us? Don't flatter yourself, Ronan. You're the only one with an image to protect here, and at great cost, it seems." He threw his head back with a contemptuous bark of laughter. "Oh, spare me the self-righteous melodrama, would you? I'm doing what's necessary to maintain the family legacy." "Your legacy is mired in lies and illegal money, you degenerate," I shot back, fighting the wave of dizziness washing over me. "How many more laws do you plan to break just to feather your filthy nest?" Ronan's face contorted in an ugly sneer. "Watch your tone when speaking to me, you ungrateful whore." The vile insult was cut off as a searing pain lanced through my abdomen, forcing me to double over with a strangled cry. Instantly, the room started spinning sickeningly as I clutched at my stomach. "Oh God, something's wrong." I whimpered through gritted teeth, panic seizing my chest. "The baby. I think she's coming." For one infinitesimal moment, Ronan's scowl slipped just enough for the briefest flicker of concern to register on his face. But it was quickly extinguished as his mask of disdain slammed back into place. "Of course you'd choose now for this pathetic drama queen act," he growled, making no move to help me. "Just another attention grab like always." I could scarcely believe his callous reaction through the haze of agony racking my body. "Ronan, please, I need help." From somewhere behind me I heard Sienna's urgent voice calling my name as she rushed to my side. "Layla! Oh my God, what's going on?" Her eyes went wide with panic as she quickly assessed the situation. "We need to get you to a hospital now." Ronan simply stood back, arms folded across his chest, with a sneer of derision painted across his smug features. "Don't bother," he spat venomously. "She's clearly just trying to stir up another scene. Pathetic even for you, Layla." White-hot rage cut through the pain as Sienna helped me up, glaring daggers at my wretched husband. "You heard the lady. She needs medical attention, asshole!" she shouted, somehow managing to steady my trembling form. "Are you really that much of a bastard that you're going to let your own child suffer?" His only response was a disdainful curl of his lip and a dismissive wave of his hand. And in that moment, any lingering shred of affection or loyalty I might have harbored for Ronan Jacobs dissipated into the ether. Through the tumultuous storm of agony and mounting rage, one thought rang out with piercing clarity. This petty, narcissistic monster could no longer be allowed to slither through this life unchecked. Not after everything he'd done, every reprehensible betrayal and cruelty I had endured at his hands. As Sienna half-carried, half-dragged me out of that wretched gala, the air thick with horrified murmurs from onlookers, I knew with every fiber of my being that there would be no quarter given, no more playing by his rules, operating within his corrupt boundaries. From this night forward, the delicate campaign of attrition would give way to an all-out scorched earth offensive. Ronan's downfall was no longer a question of if, but when. And I would be the White Walkyrie leading the charge over the charred remains of his pathetic existence until only ash and ruin remained. After the disastrous gala where Ronan so callously disregarded my health and our unborn child's well-being, any pretense of civility between us disintegrated into acrid dust. With Sienna's help, I had been rushed to the hospital, the doctors just barely managing to halt my premature labor. But that horrific night proved to be the flashpoint, the spark that ignited the wildfire of our intricately laid revenge plot. While I recovered under Sienna's watchful care, she began systematically executing the final phases of our operation, unloading salvo after salvo of damning evidence, whistleblower accounts, and criminal documentation onto the appropriate channels. Authorities, journalists, corporate watchdogs, no stone was left unturned as she mercilessly exposed the staggering depths of Ronan's duplicity and criminality. The dominoes began falling rapidly after that, one by one, until an unstoppable chain reaction took hold. SEC investigations gave way to federal grand juries, which then triggered disastrous civil lawsuits and IRS tax fraud probes. What had once been a contained snuff operation ballooned into an all-consuming inferno that threatened to engulf Ronan's entire empire of lies. And at the center of that conflagration stood the man himself, eyes bulging with impotent rage as he watched everything he'd conned and swindled for decades up in acrimonious smoke. You meddlesome bitch, he roared, slamming his meaty fist onto the desk during one of his increasingly frequent tantrums. You've ruined everything. My life's work, our legacy. It's all ashes because of your insipid vendetta. I regarded him stoically from across the office, completely unmoved by his theatrics. You have no one to blame but yourself, Ronan. Your greed and hubris were your own undoing, not me. His beady eyes narrowed to slits as he rose from behind his desk on unsteady feet. Don't play innocent with me, Layla. I know you were behind this. All of this. He gestured wildly at the stacks of legal notices and indictments littering every surface, debris from the smoldering remains of his diseased empire. You and that venomous snake, Sienna. We simply exposed the truth you worked so hard to bury, I countered coolly. Did you really think you could run this criminal farce indefinitely without any consequences? Ronan bared his teeth in an approximation of a snarl as he closed the distance between us. Up close, I could smell the reek of cheap whiskey and nervous sweat wafting off his disheveled form, a pitiful shell of the formerly sleek, intimidating con man whose fear I had lived in for so many years. You arrogant little... His slurred insult was cut off as a tiny, mewling cry pierced the air. My newborn daughter shifting restlessly in her carrier beside me. I shot him a withering glare, squaring my shoulders protectively. That's enough out of you. Not another vulgarity in front of my child. I fixed him with an icy stare, letting the unspoken threat resonate. You've inflicted enough trauma on this family. For a long, tense moment, we simply stared each other down, the snarling, feral beast backed into an inescapable corner, and the predator calmly observing its final throes. At last, Ronan seemed to wilt beneath the weight of crushing defeat clouding his gaze. Damn you, he spat bitterly, slumping back against his desk with a dull thud. Damn you and that bastard child to hell. As if on cue, Sienna strode into the room, eyes flashing as she took in the tense scene before her. Everything okay in here? Shooting Ronan one final look of disgust, I turned to face my co-conspirator and gave a tight nod. Never better. Just tying up some loose ends with the soon-to-be former Mr. Jacobs. A wicked grin split Sienna's features as she regarded her disgraced cousin with undisguised glee. Well, don't let me interrupt the reckoning. By all means, allow me to join in verbally eviscerating the sniveling husk of this pathetic, arrogant worm. She leveled a mocking glare at Ronan. Go on, you gaping asshole. What other lies do you have left to try and peddle? Ronan simply glowered in impotent rage, clenching and unclenching his fists. The faintest mutters of denial and heated curses escaped his trembling lips, but it was obvious the fight had left him. His will, his decades-long charade of power and dominance, had finally been irrevocably shattered. Turning my back to his crumpled, mumbling form, I bent down to tenderly scoop up my slumbering infant daughter, cradling her against my chest as a fierce wave of protectiveness washed over me. She was my everything now, my sole purpose, and all that mattered in this miserable world. And in that moment, I silently swore to whatever higher power that may exist, that my precious girl would never have to endure the trauma of Ronan's toxicity or fall under the twisted clutches of his family legacy. The karma he had wrought through his lifetime of malice and depravity was his cross to bear, not hers. Come on, Sienna, let's go home. There's nothing left for us among the ashes of Ronan's ruin. I spared one last contemptuous glance over my shoulder at the wretched, sniveling husk that was once my husband. This one can stew in his self-made purgatory alone. With a curt nod, Sienna fell into step beside me as we strode from the smoldering ruins of Ronan's decrepit empire. Behind us, I could feel his seething gaze burning impotently into the back of my skull. But I didn't falter, didn't dare look back. There was nothing for me amid that scorched earth, only the bright future awaiting my daughter and I beyond the caustic smoke of karmic justice. In the aftermath of Ronan's spectacular downfall, the shockwaves rippled through every facet of our lives. The legal and financial fallout had left his family's empire in irreparable ruin. Corporate entities dissolved, assets seized, reputations permanently disgraced. And at the eye of this hurricane of destruction stood Ronan himself, a bitter, sneering shell temporarily insulated by the last vestiges of his ill-gotten wealth as he licked his wounds. But even that protection was a rapidly dwindling facade. The incoming crush of criminal charges and civil litigation saw to that. I lost count of the visits from court officers, federal agents, and process servers darkening my doorstep, each one armed with another ream of subpoenas and legal filings squarely aimed at dismantling what little remained of Ronan's crumbling facade. His standard modus operandi of dismissive sneers and hollow legal threats gave way to panicked outbursts, increasingly erratic behavior, and even interventions from law enforcement when his rage spiraled out of control. "This isn't over, Layla," he roared at me through a haze of spittle during one such unhinged meltdown, eyes wild like a cornered animal. "I'll bury you in litigation for the rest of your miserable life. You'll never be free of me." Staring impassively back at him through the doorway, I didn't so much as flinch as I cradled our infant daughter protectively against my chest. "Is that so? Because from where I'm standing, it seems your options for retaliation are rapidly evaporating." "Don't get smug with me, you disloyal little cunt." Ronan's voice cracked with raw fury. "Everything I had, everything I built, it's all in ruins now, because of you. But I'll make sure you suffer just as badly before this is through. Mark my words." "Tell me, Ronan, do you honestly think threatening me is going to restore your dignity at this point?" I arched a challenging brow. "I've thoroughly dismantled any illusion of you being an intimidating presence. You're already living your worst nightmare, destitute and alone, unmourned and reviled for your reprehensible actions." He opened his mouth to retort, but I cut him off with an imperious sweep of my free hand. "Enough with the hollow bravado. We both know that deep down, you're nothing more than a coward and a charlatan whose house of cards has finally collapsed under its own weight." Pausing, I allowed the weight of my next words to resonate. "I'd tell you to give my regards to your cellmates, but something tells me they'll be able to smell the stench of your vileness a mile away." For a fleeting instant, something akin to naked fear flickered behind Ronan's eyes. But the split-second glimpse into what fragile sliver of humanity he had left was quickly snuffed out, his ferocious mask of feral defiance slamming back into place. You'll get yours, Layla. One way or another, I'll make sure of that, he snarled. No bitch takes everything from Ronan Jacobs and gets away with it unscathed. Is that so? A wry smile tugged at the corners of my mouth. We'll see about that. With one last contemptuous glare, Ronan whirled on his heel and stormed off, the once imposing figure cutting an increasingly diminutive presence with each passing day. I watched him leave unflinchingly, the weight of victory granting me a tranquil resolve I had once struggled to find amid his toxic shadow. As the fury of his exit faded into stony silence, my daughter began fussing softly against my chest. Gently shushing her, I nuzzled her downy head and hummed a tender tune until her squirms subsided into peaceful slumber once more. In that simple, serene moment, my purpose and drive crystallized into an inviolable truth. Everything I had endured, every wound and sacrifice along this tumultuous path, had all been for her. To build a world where she would never know the corrosive touch of Ronan's cruelty or malignance. A world where her limitless potential and soaring spirit would be nurtured, not bound in chains. It was then that I made an irrevocable vow, one that would guide the next phase of mine and my daughter's shared journey towards healing and vindication. I'm going to make sure that he spends the rest of his empty days withering behind bars where he belongs, I murmured, pressing a gentle kiss to my little girl's head. And in doing so, I'll cleanse every last vestige of his poison from our lives. You'll never have to know the person I was before you came along, sweetie. For far too long, the scales had been tipped decisively in Ronan's favor, my light perpetually eclipsed by the suffocating gravity of his toxicity. But in dismantling his vile empire through ruthless, strategic strikes, the karmic rebalancing had begun. Now it was time to reject his cancerous influence entirely and reclaim my destiny as the self-actualized woman and mother I was always meant to become. No more entertaining his hollow legal threats or humoring his pathetic machinations from the sidelines. No more relics from the life he had claimed for me through subjugation and fear. It was time for Ronan Jacobs to at long last reap the full consequences of his cruelty and deception, without mercy or compromise. Only then could my new chapter truly begin, a tale authored by my own steadfast convictions, free from the shackles of his arrogance and malice. As the first rays of dawn crested over the horizon, my path forward was bathed in brilliant clarity. There would be no steering from this inexorable road, no wavering amid the scattered ashes of Ronan's shattered reality. The metamorphosis was complete. Like a phoenix born anew from the purifying annihilation of his transgressions, my wings were finally unfurled and poised to carry us both into a future of boundless possibility. And this time there was no force in existence that could extinguish the radiant flame of justice and redemption blazing before us. The days and weeks following Ronan's disgrace blurred together in a whirlwind of activity as I systematically extricated every remaining tentacle of his poisonous presence from our lives. The divorce proceedings were inevitably messy and drawn out, colored by one bad-faith legal maneuver after another, as my now thoroughly disgraced ex-husband grasped at any remaining shred of leverage. But flanked by an impeccably prepared legal team and emboldened by Sienna's stalwart support, his pathetic delaying tactics proved futile. In the end, the courts had little sympathy to spare for a man whose reprehensible actions had been laid bare so publicly. Within 6 months, the divorce decree was ironclad. Full custody of our daughter, a sizable monetary settlement from what meager funds remained attachable after all the asset seizures, and every last thread connecting me to that rotting family legacy unceremoniously severed. I was finally free from the insidious manipulation, the demeaning insults and abuse, the generational cycle of toxicity Ronan had tried so desperately to entrench us both in. As the last mote of legal dust scattered, I felt an unbearable weight dissipate, replaced by an electrifying surge of possibility and newfound liberty. This life, this miraculous second chance, was ours and ours alone to author. No longer would I allow Ronan's cancerous presence to dictate the boundaries of our realm. With my meager savings and the settlement funds, I wasted no time leaving that wretched city in the rear view, desperate to put as many miles between us and those harrowing memories as possible. A quaint but comfortable home in the mountains was my chosen fresh start. a place to breathe and find tranquility among the hushed pines and crisp alpine air. Sienna came with me on that maiden voyage to my new sanctuary, helping me settle in and bearing witness to the dawning of this new reality we had fought so tenaciously to manifest. "Not bad for your stakes of the winnings, all things considered," she remarked with a roguish grin as we lounged on the cabin's spacious back patio, our contented niece gurgling happily in her arms. "Just a consolation prize, really," I replied with a dismissive wave of my hand, lazily sipping a glass of crisp white wine as I surveyed the breathtaking vista of evergreen trees rolling off into the distance. "The true bounty is the regained peace of mind, something money alone could never buy." Sienna shot me an appraising look, nodding slowly. "You've come a long way from that demure, broken-winged sparrow Ronan tried so hard to keep clipped all those years. Not sure I've ever seen a phoenix's ascension up close like this before." "Just be glad you were on my side of the bonfire when this whole warpath started," I chuckled ruefully, twisting in my seat to meet her gaze. "I shudder to think how ruthless the retribution would have been if you'd been added to the list of co-conspirators." We shared a loaded look, one that spoke volumes to the depths of conviction and camaraderie that had driven our crusade of righteous vengeance over these past months. My unlikely ally had become an indispensable confidant and comrade in arms through the harshest throes of Ronan's sinister downfall. A true sister in every sense of the word. But enough about that narcissistic shit stain. I'm over the moon just to be putting that whole cancerous saga behind me, Sienna declared with an emphatic clink of her glass against mine. "Here's to breathing that crisp, rejuvenating mountain air and never having to look over our shoulders again." "I'll drink to that," I said with a contented sigh, leaning back to bask in the warmth of the mid-afternoon sun filtering through the trees. For the first time in a long, long while, I truly felt at peace. Over the ensuing months, I steadily regained my footing and settled into my new normal of single motherhood, with Sienna's unflagging moral and logistical support by my side every step of the way. There were still days where I would be struck by sudden pangs of loathing or repressed trauma over all Ronan had put me through, phantom echoes of his scathing taunts and demeaning insults rattling like pinballs through my psyche. Yet with every passing week, those haunting whispers grew more faint, more powerless against the brilliant blaze of self-actualization and fulfillment illuminating my path forward. Gradually, steadily, I rediscovered the pieces of the woman I had once been, before Ronan's poisonous influence had so thoroughly leached her ambitions and self-worth down to empty husks. With my daughter as my unbridled source of inspiration and Sienna's sage guidance, the core pillars of my identity were steadily being rebuilt from the ground up. I dove headfirst into pursuing the high-stakes financial career I had abandoned when the Jacobs clan asserted their odious sway over my life's trajectory. The fire to establish myself as a singularly brilliant market analyst and consultant raged hotter than ever before. Within 2 years, I had clawed my way back into the cutthroat arena of high finance, rapidly establishing a hard-won reputation as a fierce, savvy negotiator with an incisive and unflinching market instinct. Seemingly overnight, my fledgling boutique consultancy went from a homespun side hustle to a force to be reckoned with on the national stage. "You've got a preternatural gift for this stuff, you know," Sienna remarked in an odd tone one evening as I exited yet another lucrative teleconference, 6 figures richer for an hour's worth of counsel. "The sheer brass one's on you to step back into this shark's den after everything you went through." I simply shrugged, my gaze drifting over to where my 5-year-old daughter lay curled up in contented slumber on the couch, clutching her favorite stuffed rabbit. They tried to break me, and nearly succeeded, mostly because I allowed them to. I'll be damned if I squander this second lease on life by needlessly limiting myself again. The raw truth of those words hung in the air for a heavy pause as we both watched my little girl's peaceful rising and falling beneath her tattered blanket. "Besides, I've got to set the bar high so this little munchkin knows just how brilliant and tenacious she can grow up to be," I continued wistfully. "Her future is the only inheritance that matters to me now. The rest is just excess noise." Meeting Sienna's proud gaze with a resolute nod of affirmation, I felt the last vestiges of doubt and fear permanently slough off, like the molted skin of a transcendent serpent. What had once been shameful shackles had been meticulously reworked into brilliant new armor, steeled against the harsh realities that still lurked beyond this sanctum. Because out there in that tumultuous world, the specter of Ronan Jacobs and his ilk still festered. Venal, vicious aberrations perpetually locked in conflict with the strength and integrity I now embodied. And while his individual chapter had been scribed into ignominious history, that eternal crusade waged on in others. But I was more than ready to face those battles anew with a cleansed spirit and crystalline clarity of purpose, to uplift and cultivate that divine spark of potential until it erupted into an all-consuming wildfire, burning away every last mote of indignity and fear. No more poisoned births or anguished gasps for air amid that choking miasma of societal toxicity. Only the radiant promise of new dawns, to be ushered in by champions of change and retribution, unshackled from the anchors of oppression. Because on that day, standing at the precipice of our boldly reclaimed destiny, I was no longer prey, just the merciless apex predator, continually reborn in a blaze of glory.
I'm Rachel, a 32-year-old who used to think that fairy tales had happy ends. When I met Mark, the guy who would become my husband, 3 years ago, my life took an unexpected turn. This is our story, an apparently flawless marriage serving as the backdrop for a journey of love, trust, and ultimately betrayal. I was destined to find the corner cafe on a typical Tuesday morning. Holding a John Grisham book, I became engrossed in the realm of legal thrillers. At that point, Mark showed up. It didn't take long to notice him. Although he exuded confidence, there was an enticing warmth to his smile. "Hi, is that the most recent work by Grisham?" he inquired, gesturing to my book. His tone was kind and full of sincere interest. "Yes, I've just started," I replied, pleasantly surprised by how easy our discussion flowed. He's always a good read. We struck up a conversation that flowed as we discussed our favorite authors. Mark had a funny and charming sense of humor that always made me smile. Ours picked up speed, making us feel more like two newly acquainted acquaintances than old buddies catching up. In the weeks that followed, Mark and I grew closer. Our shared interests in music, particularly old jazz, and a mutual love for exploring hidden bookstores around the city cemented our bond. He was charming, respectful, and attentive. I found myself eagerly anticipating our dates, each encounter leaving me more enchanted. One evening as we walked along the river, Mark's tone turned serious. "Rachel, I've never felt this way before. I think I'm falling for you," he confessed under the dim glow of the streetlights. His words sent a rush of warmth through me. "I feel the same, Mark. You're unlike anyone I've ever met," I admitted, my heart racing with excitement and a hint of fear. 6 months flew by, and our relationship only grew stronger. It was during a cozy dinner at my apartment when Mark proposed. The moment was simple yet profoundly sincere. There was no hesitation in my yes. I loved him, and I believed in our future together. The joy of our engagement, however, was soon met with apprehension as the time came to meet Mark's parents. His mother, Linda, was a stern woman with piercing eyes that seemed to judge my every move. His father was more amiable, but there was an undeniable seriousness to him, especially regarding the institution of marriage. During a formal dinner at their house, Mark's father brought up the subject of a prenuptial agreement. "It's just practical," he stated matter-of-factly. The request caught me off guard, but given my past experience with a cheating ex-boyfriend, I understood the necessity. "I agree, but I have a condition," I said, steadying my voice. "If either of us cheats, the cheater owes the other $100,000. Mark's expression was a mix of surprise and respect. "I promise, Rachel, I'd never cheat on you," he said earnestly. I wanted to believe him, to trust that this time my heart was safe. Our wedding was a beautiful affair filled with laughter, dancing, and promises of forever. The first year of our marriage felt like living in a dream. We traveled to romantic destinations, enjoyed quiet evenings at home, and supported each other's ambitions. Mark was not just my husband, he was my best friend, my confidant. After the whirlwind of our wedding, Mark and I settled into married life with an ease that surprised even me. Our first year was like living in a bubble of happiness, untouched by the outside world. Our honeymoon in Paris was a dream. Strolling along the Seine, we were just two lovebirds lost in a city of love. Can you believe we're here? I asked Mark one evening as we watched the Eiffel Tower light up. He pulled me close and said, "With you, I can believe anything. This is just the start for us, Rachel." Those days were filled with laughter, romantic dinners, and promises of a future together. We returned home with a suitcase full of memories and a bond that felt unbreakable. Back home, our days found a comfortable routine. Mark would kiss me goodbye every morning before heading to work, and I'd be waiting with dinner when he got back. We talked about everything and nothing, our conversation stretching late into the night. One night, as we were cleaning up after dinner, Mark said, "You know, I never thought I'd be this happy just doing mundane stuff like washing dishes." I playfully splashed some water at him. "That's because you've got an amazing wife. It's all about good company," he laughed, catching the water in his hands. "Absolutely. Best decision of my life, marrying you." Despite our happiness, there was a growing pressure from outside, the expectation of starting a family. At family gatherings, Mark's mom, Linda, would often drop not-so-subtle hints. "So when are we going to hear some good news?" Linda asked one Sunday lunch, her tone laced with expectation. I tried to brush it off with a joke. "Oh, you'll be the first to know when there's news." But her persistence grew over time and started to strain me. Mark noticed my discomfort but reassured me, "Don't let my mom get to you. We'll start a family when we're ready, not a minute sooner." Despite these pressures, our first year of marriage was magical. We celebrated our first anniversary with a quiet dinner at home. Mark surprised me with a necklace I had admired months ago. "Happy anniversary, Rachel. Here's to many more years of happiness," he said, his eyes shining with love. I felt tears prick my eyes as I said, "Thank you, Mark. I couldn't have asked for a better partner in life." That night, as we cuddled on the couch, I couldn't help but feel incredibly lucky. I had a husband who loved me, a cozy home, and a future that seemed bright. As our second year of marriage began, the pressure from Mark's family, especially his mother Linda, started to take a toll on me. It wasn't just about starting a family anymore. Her criticisms seeped into every aspect of our lives. Linda had a way of making her disapproval known, often under the guise of helpful comments. Every visit became a nightmare for me. One afternoon, as I was setting the table for lunch, she walked into the kitchen and eyed the spread with a disapproving frown. "Is this what you're serving? A bit simple, don't you think?" Linda remarked, her tone dripping with disdain. I clenched my jaw, trying to maintain my composure. "I thought we'd enjoy something light today." She just sniffed, muttering under her breath about proper meals and good housekeeping. Her comments weren't just confined to my cooking. She found fault in everything I did, from the way I decorated the house to how I spent my free time. Nothing was off limits. One evening, while Mark and I were relaxing in the living room, Linda decided to give her unsolicited opinion. "You know, Rachel, if Mark gave me the money he spends on you, I could hire a proper cleaner and a cook." Mark looked uncomfortable, but didn't say anything. His silence felt like a betrayal. I was seething but managed to say, "Well, Linda, I'm doing my best here." What hurt the most was how Mark's attitude started to change. He began echoing his mother's criticisms, albeit in a more subtle way. After one of Linda's visits, Mark casually mentioned, "Mom might have a point about the house. Maybe we should consider getting some help." I felt a pang of hurt and frustration. "So you think I can't handle it either?" I asked, my voice trembling. "No, that's not what I meant," he backpedaled, but the damage was done. The constant criticisms and Mark's growing detachment were straining our marriage. We started having arguments over trivial things, our once easy conversations turning into tense exchanges. After a particularly heated argument, I found myself wondering aloud, "What happened to us, Mark? We used to be on the same team." He ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I don't know, Rachel. It's just everything feels so complicated now. I went to bed that night feeling lonely and misunderstood. Linda's insidious comments had not only invaded my home, but were also creeping into my marriage, leaving me to wonder if the love Mark and I shared was strong enough to withstand this constant barrage of negativity. As the third year of our marriage rolled in, a sense of unease began to settle in my heart. The once bright flame of our love seemed to flicker under the shadow of doubt and mistrust. It started with a phone call, or rather, several of them. A name kept popping up on Mark's phone, Jake. I couldn't help but notice how Mark's demeanor changed whenever that name flashed on the screen. One evening, while we were watching TV, his phone rang again. Jake. The screen flashed. Mark quickly silenced it and put the phone away, but not before I saw the nervous glance he threw my way. "Who's Jake?" I asked, trying to sound casual, but my heart was pounding. "Oh, just a new guy at work. No one important," Mark replied, but his voice was too nonchalant, his answer too rehearsed. Mark's behavior began to change. He started coming home late from work, his excuses flimsy and inconsistent. His wardrobe underwent a transformation too, from casual to sharply tailored suits. "Working late again?" I questioned one night as he prepared to leave, noticing his dressed-up appearance. "Yeah, a big project," he said without meeting my eyes. "Don't wait up." One day my frustration boiled over. As Mark was about to leave for another late night at work, I confronted him. "This isn't like you, Mark. What's really going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. Mark sighed, his expression a mix of guilt and annoyance. "I told you it's just work. Why can't you trust me?" "Because you're hiding something. You're never here, and when you are, it's like you're a million miles away," I shot back, my eyes stinging with tears. Mark didn't respond. He just grabbed his coat and left, leaving me standing there, feeling more alone than ever. That night, lying in our empty bed, I made a decision. I couldn't live in this limbo of doubt and suspicion. I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. The next morning, I called a private detective. It felt like a betrayal, but the constant worry and uncertainty were eating me alive. I needed answers, and I was determined to get them, no matter what they revealed about the man I thought I knew. The days after contacting the private detective were a haze of anxiety and anticipation. I felt like I was walking on a tightrope, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy while my world was quietly crumbling around me. Then the call came, and with it, the shattering of my last hope. "Mrs. Johnson, we have conclusive evidence. I'm afraid your suspicions were correct." The detective's voice was solemn, heavy with the weight of the news he was delivering. He explained that Mark had been having an affair. The mysterious Jake on his phone was actually a woman. My heart sank as he detailed their meetings, providing timestamps and photos. It was irrefutable. I sat there, phone in hand, feeling a mix of devastation and vindication. My worst fears weren't just fears anymore. They were cold, hard facts. Despite the pain, I decided not to confront Mark immediately. I needed more than just the evidence of his infidelity. I needed to understand the full extent of his deceit. One evening, as I was passing by his home office, I overheard a conversation that chilled me to the bone. Mark was talking to his mother, Linda. "Mom, I'm planning to end it with Rachel after your birthday." Mark's voice was cold, devoid of any affection he once had for me. "Oh, that's wise, dear. Make sure she gets me a nice 65th birthday present before you drop the bomb," Linda replied, her voice laced with a callousness that took my breath away. I leaned against the wall, feeling nauseous. Not only was my husband unfaithful, but he and his mother were plotting against me, waiting to use me for one last expensive gift before discarding me. Fueled by a mixture of anger and resolve, I decided to play along. I continued as if nothing was wrong while secretly gathering more evidence of Mark's infidelity. The detective provided me with everything: photos, videos, and even audio recordings. I was building my case, preparing for the moment I would strike back. As I lay in bed each night next to the man who had betrayed me, a plan began to form in my mind. I would wait until after Linda's birthday. I would give them the illusion of victory, let them think they had outsmarted me. But when they least expected it, I would reveal everything and turn the tables. As Linda's 65th birthday approached, I put on a mask of ignorance, acting as though everything was normal. Inside, I was a cauldron of emotions: anger, betrayal, and a fierce determination to see my plan through. A few days before the birthday, Linda casually mentioned her upcoming celebration during a family dinner. "So, Rachel, I'm expecting a grand 65th birthday. You must have planned something special for me," she said with a saccharine smile, clearly anticipating a lavish gift. Keeping my emotions in check, I replied with faint enthusiasm, "Of course, Linda. I've arranged a dinner at the city's most luxurious restaurant. It'll be a night to remember." Her eyes lit up with glee, not realizing the trap I was setting. "Oh, how wonderful. I can't wait. Just a small family gathering, right?" "Yes, very intimate and exclusive, just for close family," I confirmed, my words laced with hidden irony. Later that night, Mark approached me, a hint of suspicion in his voice. "That's quite a generous plan for Mum's birthday. Are you sure about this?" I looked at him, maintaining my composure. "Absolutely. It's a significant birthday, and I want to do something special for her." Mark seemed appeased, but I could tell he was puzzled by my willingness to indulge his mother. As the day of the dinner drew near, I took care of the final arrangements. I confirmed the booking in Linda's name, rechecked the guest list, and made sure everything was set for the grand evening. I was playing the dutiful wife and daughter-in-law, but underneath the facade, I was ready to expose the betrayal and deceit that had been festering in our marriage. The night before the dinner, as I lay in bed, I couldn't help but feel a twisted sense of satisfaction. I was hours away from turning the tables on Mark and Linda. They thought they were using me for one last benefit before discarding me. Little did they know, I was the one controlling the game now. The evening of Linda's 65th birthday was set in a luxurious restaurant. Every detail was meticulously planned to reflect the grandeur of the occasion. As Linda reveled in the opulence, I played the part of the gracious daughter-in-law, masking my inner turmoil with a practiced smile. As the dinner drew to a close, the waiter presented the bill, $4,500. I reached for my card with a steady hand, my heart pounding in my chest. After swiping the card, I glanced around the table, seeing Linda's satisfied smirk and Mark's uneasy expression. "Thank you for such a wonderful evening, Rachel. This is truly generous," Linda said, her voice dripping with insincerity. It was then that Mark leaned in, his voice laced with mockery. "By the way, Rachel, I want a divorce." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I refused to let them see my pain. Linda, seizing the moment, chimed in sharply. "Well then, I guess you should leave. This is a family gathering, after all." Without a word, I stood up and left the restaurant, my dignity intact, despite the turmoil inside. As I walked away, I pulled out my phone and swiftly canceled the payment. Then, with a few more taps, I blocked the shared account. Mark couldn't cover the cost either. Back at home, I packed my belongings quickly, the finality of my actions setting in. I was leaving this chapter of my life behind, stepping into an uncertain but hopeful future. Soon, my phone erupted with calls. I answered, and Linda's voice, shrill with rage and panic, filled my ears. The payment didn't go through. The restaurant staff called the police. "What have you done?" Her words were a cacophony of anger and disbelief, but I remained silent, letting her tirade wash over me. This was their doing, their betrayal and manipulation coming back to haunt them. After hanging up, I looked around the empty house, a place once filled with dreams and love, now just a hollow shell. I took a deep breath, stepped out the door, and didn't look back. Their calls continued, a desperate plea for help that I no longer felt obliged to answer. I had made my move, exposed their deceit, and now it was time for me to rebuild away from the lies and the pain that had defined my life for far too long. After leaving my marital home, I spent a restless night at a friend's place, my mind racing with what needed to be done next. The morning sun brought with it a sense of clarity and determination. It was time for the final confrontation. I arrived at the house to find Mark and Linda waiting, their faces a mix of anger and confusion, clutching the divorce papers and the evidence of Mark's infidelity. I steeled myself for the battle ahead. Linda was the first to break the silence, her voice dripping with scorn. "So you've come crawling back after embarrassing us like that?" I met her gaze, unflinching. "I'm not here to crawl. I'm here for a divorce." Mark, who announced our divorce a day ago, suddenly tried to win everything back. "Rachel, can't we talk about this? It was a mistake." I cut him off, holding up the evidence. "Save it, Mark. Your mistake was ongoing and well documented." Linda scoffed, trying to regain control. "You think you can just walk away and leave us with nothing. You're nothing without us." I laid the divorce papers on the table. "Actually, it's you who will be leaving me with something. According to our prenup, Mark owes me $100,000 for his infidelity." Mark's face went pale, and Linda's eyes widened in shock as they scrambled to respond. I felt a weight lifting off my shoulders. This was it, the end of the lies, the deceit, and the pain. "You can try to fight this, but the evidence is clear. I suggest you pay up and move on," I said, my voice steady. Linda had lost her customary boldness and was dumbfounded, while Mark appeared defeated. I turned and left the house without saying anything more, feeling a sense of liberation as the door closed behind me. The subsequent appeals and calls were ignored. I had permanently closed that chapter of my life. They ultimately had to pay. Although Mark needed to borrow money from his parents, I didn't give a damn where it came from. It provided some little comfort for the betrayal, but more than anything it brought finality. I felt at ease when I signed the final paperwork while sitting in the attorney's office. Despite the difficult journey filled with heartbreak and betrayal, I emerged stronger and more resilient. Feeling liberated, I ventured outside into the daylight, eager to begin afresh. Though everything remained unclear, I might still influence the future. I felt like I was finally entering the light after all the darkness.
I never expected to discover my husband's betrayal during what should have been a normal Sunday brunch. But there I was, frozen in my own hallway, listening to him plot with his parents about how to get his hands on my family's money. My name is Sloan, and until that moment, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life. I'm a music teacher, married to Reed, who I thought was the love of my life, and mother to our amazing 3-year-old daughter, Lila. My parents built a comfortable life for themselves through hard work, and I've always been proud to follow their example of independence. "She just needs the right push," Reed was saying in our living room, his voice carrying that smooth, confident tone he usually reserved for his sales pitches. "If we can convince her to quit teaching, she'll have to rely more on her parents' support." I pressed myself against the wall, my heart pounding. Lila was upstairs taking her nap, and I'd just come back from checking on her when I heard them talking. "Darling, you're being too subtle," my mother-in-law Camille's voice dripped with honey-coated venom. "That salon chain her mother runs is worth millions. Sloan needs to understand that her little music teaching career is, well, beneath her potential." Beneath her potential? I mouthed silently, my hands clenching into fists. "It's not that simple," Reed sighed. "Sloan's stubborn about her independence. She gets that from her father." "Well, her father's not getting any younger," Grant, my father-in-law, chimed in. "And neither is her mother. Have you looked into their estate planning?" I felt sick. The conversation continued, but their voices became muffled by the blood rushing in my ears. 3 years of marriage, and I'd never heard Reed talk about me like this. Like I was some puzzle to be solved, a resource to be mined. The worst part? They were discussing my parents' money as if they were already dead. My mom, who still works 60-hour weeks at her salons because she loves what she does. My dad, who still tinkers with new tech innovations in his home office, more alive than ever in his retirement. I must have made some sound because the conversation in the living room suddenly stopped. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my shoulders and walked in, plastering on my best teacher smile, the one I use when catching students passing notes in class. "Hey everyone," I said, proud of how steady my voice sounded. "Having a nice chat?" Reed's face flickered with something. Guilt? Concern? Before settling into his usual charming smile. "Hey, babe. We were just talking about your career." "Oh." I picked up my coffee mug from the side table, needing something to do with my hands. "Anything interesting?" Camille jumped in, all perfectly manicured nails and practice concern. "Darling, we were just discussing how you could have so many more opportunities if you weren't tied down to teaching. With your family's resources." "My family's resources," I interrupted, taking a slow sip of my now cold coffee, "are exactly that. My family's." The room went quiet. Reed shifted in his seat, that familiar crease appearing between his eyebrows, the one that shows up when a sale isn't going his way. "Sloan," he started, but I cut him off with a look. "I think I need some air," I said, setting down my mug with a careful precision that belied the trembling in my hands. "Would you all mind watching Lila for a bit? I just need to clear my head." As I grabbed my keys and headed for the door, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I looked exactly the same as I had this morning, but everything felt different. The woman staring back at me had just discovered that her marriage might be built on a foundation of lies. And she was already planning what to do about it. The week after I overheard Reed's conversation with his parents, I found myself sitting at my parents' dining table, watching my mother arrange flowers like nothing was wrong with the world. I hadn't told them about what I discovered yet. How do you tell your parents that their son-in-law sees them as a walking investment portfolio? "You're quieter than usual," Mom said, trimming a stem with practiced precision. "Is everything okay with Lila?" "Lila's perfect," I replied, managing a small smile. "She's with Reed at his parents' house." Mom's hands stilled for a moment.
"Ah."
Camille and Grant's. The way she said their names told me everything I needed to know about her opinion of my in-laws. I should have paid more attention to her instincts 3 years ago. "They're hosting a dinner tonight," I continued, tracing the wood grain of the table with my finger, "to discuss a new business venture." Dad looked up from his tablet, his engineer's mind already clicking into gear. "What kind of venture?" "I don't know yet, but they specifically requested that you and Mom come too." "Did they now?" Mom's voice had that edge to it, the same one she used when dealing with difficult suppliers for her salon chain. "How interesting." The doorbell rang before I could respond. My stomach dropped when I saw Reed through the window, arriving early with his parents in tow. Lila wasn't with them. "Where's Lila?" I asked as soon as they entered. "The nanny's watching her," Reed answered smoothly, kissing my cheek. "We thought it would be better to discuss business, without distractions." I caught the look that passed between my parents. They'd always supported my decision to keep teaching after Lila was born, unlike Camille, who called it playing at having a career. Dinner was a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare. Camille praised Mom's cooking while simultaneously suggesting she must be too busy with her little salons to cook often. Grant kept steering the conversation toward retirement planning, while Reed maintained his salesman's smile, watching everyone like he was waiting for the perfect moment to close a deal. "So," Reed finally said, setting down his wine glass, "we wanted to discuss an exciting opportunity." "Here it comes," I thought. "There's this amazing property development project," he continued. "Premium location, guaranteed returns. But we need initial investors." My father's expression didn't change, but I saw his hand tighten around his fork. "And you're bringing this to us because?" "Because family should help family," Camille jumped in. "And with your resources, it would be such a shame not to." "Our resources," my mother interrupted, are already allocated to expanding the salon chain. We're opening 3 new locations next month. I watched Reed's face fall slightly before he recovered. But surely some diversification would be wise? Marlo, your business is successful, but property development could provide much better returns. Better returns than the business I built from nothing? Mom's voice could have frozen hell. The business that put Sloan through college debt-free? That's not what Reed meant, Camille said quickly. We just think. I know exactly what you think. I cut in, surprising myself with how calm I sounded. You think my parents' money is your safety net. You think my mother's business is just a stepping stone to something better. You think I should quit my job and let my husband handle the finances. The room went dead silent. Reed stared at me, his charm cracking to reveal something darker underneath. Have you been eavesdropping on private conversations? Private conversations about my family's money? I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Yes, I heard everything last Sunday. And I've been watching you ever since, waiting to see if you'd come clean. Instead, you brought your parents here to help you pitch this scheme. Sloan, Reed started, but my father cut him off. I think it's time for you all to leave, Dad said quietly. His calm tone carried more weight than any shout. As they left, Reed lingered in the doorway. We'll talk about this at home. No, I replied. We won't, because I'm staying here tonight, with my daughter. You can't just watch me. After they left, I sat between my parents on the couch, feeling like a kid again. Except this time, the monster wasn't under my bed. It was wearing my wedding ring. I'm so sorry, I whispered. Mom squeezed my hand. Don't be sorry. Be smart. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. I never meant to become a detective in my own marriage, but there I was at midnight, scrolling through Reed's laptop while he slept upstairs. The house was silent except for the hum of the heating system and my racing heart. What started as a gut feeling led me to his email. The password was still Lila's birthday, something that should have been sweet but now felt like another manipulation. My hands trembled as I clicked through folder after folder, each one revealing another piece of the puzzle I wished I'd never started solving. Oh God, I whispered, staring at a bank statement. The numbers didn't lie. Reed had been hemorrhaging money for months. Failed investments, hidden credit cards, loans I never knew about. But what made my stomach turn was an email thread with his parents about accessing Marlo's business accounts. The floor creaked behind me. Find what you're looking for? I spun around to find Reed standing in the doorway, his face half hidden in shadow. He didn't look angry. Worse, he looked calculating. How long have you been planning to steal from my mother's business? My voice was steady, despite the tremor in my hands. Steal is such an ugly word. He stepped into the room, running a hand through his sleet-messed hair. I prefer to think of it as redistributing family resources. Family resources? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the business my mother built from nothing? The one she worked 18-hour days for? The one that could save us? He slammed his hand on the desk, making me jump. Do you know what it's like, living in the shadow of your family's success? Having everyone compare me to your father? So, this is about your ego? This is about survival. He leaned closer, his charm completely gone now. I'm drowning here, Sloan. The property development deal fell through. I owe people money. How much? More than you want to know. I stood up slowly, putting distance between us. And you thought the solution was to steal from my mother? I thought the solution was to use available resources to stop. I held up my hand. Just stop with the sales pitch. For once in your life, be honest. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the facade. Fine. You want honest? I'm broke. Everything I built is gone. And your parents? They're sitting on a fortune while watching me fail. They worked for that fortune. And I worked too. His voice rose, making me glance nervously at the ceiling, thinking of Lila. But nothing I do is ever enough. Not for them. Not for my parents, not for you. Don't you dare make this about me, I hissed. I loved you. I supported you. I never once asked about money. Exactly. He laughed bitterly. You never had to ask about money. You've always had it as a safety net. Must be nice. I opened my email and started forwarding myself copies of everything I'd found. Reed watched me, his jaw tightening. What are you doing? Protecting my family. I met his eyes. You have 12 hours to tell my parents everything or I will. And believe me, you'd rather it come from you. You're bluffing. Try me. I grabbed my phone and headed for the stairs. I'm getting Lila. He caught my arm. It's the middle of the night. Let go of me. My voice was ice. Or the first call I make won't be to my parents. It'll be to the police. His hand dropped. As I packed a bag for Lila, I could hear him pacing downstairs, making phone calls in hushed, angry tones. I knew he was calling his parents, probably trying to damage control. Let them try. 20 minutes later, I was buckling a sleepy Lila into her car seat. Reed stood in the doorway, watching us. This isn't over, he said. You're right, I replied, starting the car. It's just beginning. As I drove through the dark streets toward my parents' house, Lila dozed in the back seat. I caught glimpses of her in the rearview mirror, so innocent, so unaware of how her world was about to change. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my resolve strengthening. Reed was right about one thing. This wasn't over. But he had no idea what was coming next. They say bad news comes in threes. I just never expected all three to hit within 24 hours. The first came at dawn, when my lawyer called to tell me Reed had already withdrawn half our savings. Legal, since both our names were on the account, but devastating nonetheless. I sat in my parents' guest room, watching Lila sleep while my hands shook around my phone. The second blow landed at noon. Mom collapsed at one of her salons. Stroke, the doctor said in the sterile hospital hallway. She's stable, but the next 48 hours are critical. I stood there, numb, as Dad gripped my hand. The fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and unreal, like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. The third hit just before midnight. A text from an unknown number. Thought you should see this. Attached was a photo of Reed leaving a hotel with Camille, carrying documents. The timestamp showed it was taken just hours after I'd left with Lila. I was still staring at my phone when Dad came back from the coffee machine. The vultures are already circling, he said quietly, handing me a cup. Reed's been calling the salon managers, trying to get financial information. How did you? Maria called. She's worked with your mother for 15 years. She knows something's wrong. He sat heavily in the plastic chair beside me. They all do. A nurse walked past, her shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Through the window of Mom's room, I could see her lying there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. The woman who taught me to stand on my own 2 feet couldn't even breathe without machines. Dad, I started, but my voice cracked. I know. He pulled out his tablet, pulling up documents I recognized from Mom's office. Your mother and I, we've been expecting something like this. Not this exactly, but what do you mean? We've seen the way Reed and his parents look at what we've built, like it's their backup plan. His fingers moved across the screen, entering passwords. Your mother made some changes last month. Transferred majority control of the salons to you. The coffee cup nearly slipped from my hand. She what? She said she had a feeling. He smiled sadly. She always did have good instincts about people. A commotion at the nurse's station made us both look up. Reed was there, arguing with security, Camille hovering behind him with her perfect makeup and predatory eyes. Sir, only family is allowed, the guard was saying. I am family, Reed's voice carried down the hall. That's my mother-in-law in there. I stood up, my body moving before my brain could catch up. Dad grabbed my arm. Let security handle it.
No.
I handed him my coffee. I need to end this now. Reed saw me coming and switched on his concerned husband act. Sloan, baby, I've been so worried. Save it. I stopped just out of reach. I saw the hotel photos. His face flickered with surprise before settling into righteous indignation. You're having me followed? Apparently someone else is. I glanced at Camille, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. What documents were you reviewing with your mother at the Grand Hotel? That's private business. Nothing about my family's business is private to you anymore. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You have exactly one chance to walk away with your dignity intact. Leave now, or I release everything I found on your laptop to every investor you've ever worked with. Camille grabbed his arm. Reed, let's go. But he shook her off, his mask finally cracking. You think you can threaten me? I know things too. Things about your father's tech patents, about what? Dad's voice came from behind me, steady and cold. Please, enlighten us about my business, Reed. I'm very interested in hearing what you think you know. The security guard stepped closer. Sir, I need you to leave. For a moment, I thought Reed might actually try to fight. But then his shoulders slumped, and I saw him clearly for the first time, a scared little boy playing at being a businessman, drowning in his own lies. This isn't over, he said, but the threat sounded hollow. Actually, it is. I turned back toward Mom's room. My lawyer will contact you tomorrow. As they were escorted out, I heard Camille hissing at Reed, but I didn't bother listening. I had more important things to focus on, like protecting what my mother had built, like being the daughter she always believed I could be, like making sure the people who tried to destroy my family never got another chance. The salon mirrors reflected my mother's empty office chair as I sorted through the mess Reed had left behind. 3 days after her stroke, and I was already finding holes in the business accounts, small at first, then larger, like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to something worse. MS. Sloan. Maria, our head stylist, appeared in the doorway. They're here again. I didn't need to ask who they were. Through the glass walls, I could see Camille and Grant in the waiting area, dressed like they were heading to a board meeting instead of a beauty salon. Send them in. I kept my eyes on the computer screen, making them wait as I finished reviewing another suspicious transaction. Sloan, darling. Camille's perfume arrived before she did. We've been trying to reach you. I've been busy discovering what your son did to my mother's business. I finally looked up. Would you like to explain these transfer authorizations with your signature on them? Grant shifted uncomfortably. Now, Sloan, business is complicated. Theft usually is. I turned the screen toward them. Did you think no one would notice? That my mother would just write it off as a family favor? Your mother understood the importance of family, Camille said, her voice sharp. Unlike you, apparently. I laughed, the sound hollow even to my own ears. Family? Is that what you call embezzlement these days? We prefer to think of it as a temporary reallocation. Grant pulled out a folder. Actually, we have a proposal that could solve everyone's problems. The only problem I have is sitting in front of me. Camille leaned forward, her designer bracelet catching the light. Your mother's in the hospital, Sloan. The business needs strong leadership. Reed has experience. Reed has experience stealing from it. I stood up, my chair rolling back. And now I know you helped him. Be reasonable, Grant pleaded. We can make this go away. Sign over controlling interest to Reed, and we'll forget about pressing charges for the irregularities we found in your father's tech patents. My blood ran cold. What irregularities? Camille smiled, all teeth and triumph. Let's just say Reed did his homework. It would be a shame if the patent office received an anonymous tip about your father's early development processes. The pieces clicked together. Reed's late nights researching, his sudden interest in Dad's old projects. They'd been planning this for months. Get out. My voice was steady, despite the rage building in my chest. Think about Lila, Camille pressed. About her future. About what a messy legal battle would do to her. Something in me snapped. I picked up my mother's heavy glass paperweight, turning it over in my hands. You know what my mother told me about building this business? She said sometimes you have to be willing to break things to build them stronger. I brought the paperweight down on the corner of her desk, cracking the glass surface. They both jumped. That was your first warning. I set the paperweight down carefully. Here's your second. I have copies of everything. Every transfer, every forged signature, every reallocation. One phone call, and it all goes to the FBI. You wouldn't, Grant stammered. Think about Reed. I am thinking about Reed. I'm thinking about how good he'll look in orange. I walked to the door, holding it open. You have 24 hours to return every penny, or I start making calls. And if you ever mention my daughter again, I'll make sure the only way you see her is through prison visiting room glass." After they scurried out, Maria appeared with a cup of tea. "Your mother would be proud," she said quietly. I looked at the cracked desk, thinking of Mom lying in that hospital bed, of Dad poring over his old patents, of Lila asking why she couldn't go home. "No," I replied, picking up my phone. "Not yet, but she will be." I dialed my lawyer's number, watching Camille and Grant hurry to their car through the salon windows. They thought they could use my family against me? Fine. Time to show them exactly what kind of woman my mother raised. Time to make them regret ever hearing the name Sloan. The divorce papers sat untouched on Reed's desk while he paced his office like a caged animal. I'd chosen this moment carefully, after hours, when his staff had gone home. But before he could escape to whatever hotel he was hiding in these days. "You can't be serious." He picked up the papers, then dropped them like they burned. "After everything we've built." "You mean after everything you've stolen?" I stayed standing, keeping the desk between us. "The salon accounts, my father's patents, our savings?" "I was trying to save us." He slammed his hands on the desk. "Your parents have been holding us back, controlling everything with their money. The only one trying to control anything is you." I pushed the papers toward him. "Sign them." He laughed, a harsh sound that made me flinch. "Or what? You'll tell Daddy? Have him sue me? Go ahead. I'll drag every skeleton out of his closet. Every shortcut he took building his precious tech empire." "You're bluffing." "Am I?" He pulled out his phone, showing me documents I'd never seen before. "Your father wasn't as clean as you think. Want to know how many corners he cut? How many people he stepped on?" My hands started shaking. "Those are fake. The patent office won't think so." His smile turned cruel. "Neither will his investors. One anonymous tip, and it all comes crashing down. You destroy him just to hurt me? I destroy him to protect what's mine." He stepped around the desk. "Including you." I backed away, bumping into the wall. "I was never yours to own." "No." He moved closer. "Then why did you marry me? Because you loved me? Or because your parents approved of my pedigree, my connections?" "Stop it. Face it, Sloan. You're just like me. Playing the game, using people." "I'm nothing like you." "Really?" He grabbed my wrist as I tried to leave. "Then why are you here alone? Why didn't you bring your lawyer?" "Because you thought you could manipulate me, just like your mother taught you." I yanked my arm free. "Don't talk about my mother." "Poor Marlo," he continued, his voice mocking. "All those years building her empire, and now she can't even speak to defend it. How long before the board pushes you out? A month? A week?" Something inside me snapped. I grabbed the nearest object, a crystal award from his desk, and hurled it at the wall. The crash was satisfying, but not as satisfying as the way he jumped. "You want to talk about manipulation?" My voice shook with rage. "Let's talk about how you and your parents planned this from the beginning. How you married me for my family's money. How you—" The office door opened. Camille stood there, looking perfectly composed despite the late hour. I thought I heard voices. She glanced at the shattered crystal. "Having a disagreement? Get out," I spat. "I'm afraid I can't do that." She held up her phone. "Not when I have such interesting security footage of you assaulting my son." My blood ran cold. "What?" "You throwing things, threatening him." She clicked her tongue. Not very maternal behavior. I wonder what a judge would think about Lila's safety with such an unstable mother. The room spun. They'd planned this too. The confrontation, the security footage, everything. "You wouldn't dare use my daughter against me. Try us." Reed's voice was soft, dangerous. "Sign over your controlling interest in the salons, and we forget this happened. Fight us, and you'll lose everything. The business, your father's reputation, and Lila." I looked between them, mother and son, so alike in their calculated cruelty. All my careful plans, my evidence of their theft, meant nothing if they could paint me as unstable, dangerous. "I'll give you 24 hours to decide," Camille said, as if offering a generous gift. Choose wisely. They left me there, surrounded by shattered crystal and broken dreams. My phone buzzed, a text from Dad about Mom's condition worsening. Another from my lawyer warning about Reed's countersuit. I slid down the wall, the divorce papers scattered around me like fallen leaves. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had no idea how to fight back. But I knew one thing. I couldn't let them win. Not just for me, but for Lila. For Mom. For everything our family had built. I just had to figure out how. The moment I walked into Reed's parents' house, I knew something was wrong. The place was too quiet, too still, like a trap waiting to be sprung. I found them in the study, Reed, Camille, and Grant, arranged like a tribunal behind the massive oak desk. The security footage from Reed's office played silently on a laptop between them. "Where's Lila?" I asked, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "Safe," Camille replied. "With the nanny. We thought it best to handle this professionally." I set my own laptop on the desk. "Funny. I was thinking the same thing." Reed's smirk faltered when I opened it, revealing a video chat window. Maria's face appeared, along with my father's lawyer and, most surprisingly, Grant's former business partner, Thomas. "Hello, Grant," Thomas said, his voice crackling through the speakers. "Been a while." Grant's face went pale. "What is this?" "This," I said, pulling out a USB drive, "is everything. The real records from the salon accounts. Dad's original patent documentation. And something really interesting from Thomas about some creative accounting you and Reed did at your old firm." Camille stood up sharply. "You're bluffing." "Like you were bluffing about that security footage?" I played my own recording from my phone, which had captured the entire setup at Reed's office. Amazing what modern phones can do, isn't it? Reed lunged for my laptop, but I was faster, stepping back. "Don't bother. It's all backed up. And if anything happens to me or Lila, it goes straight to the FBI." "You destroy your own family?" Reed's voice cracked. "Your daughter's future?" "No, Reed. I'm saving it. From you." "We can still work this out," Camille interjected, her perfectly manicured hands spreading in a placating gesture. "We're family." "Family?" I laughed. "Family doesn't steal from each other. Family doesn't use a 3-year-old as leverage. Family doesn't." "Oh, spare us the moral high ground," Reed snapped. "You're just like us, using whatever advantage you can get. The difference is, I'm not doing this for money." I turned to Thomas. "Show them." Thomas shared his screen, displaying financial records that made Grant audibly gasp. "This is what they really took from your mother's business, Sloan. And this." More documents appeared. This is what they were planning to do next. The room went silent except for the hum of the laptop fans. I watched their faces as they realized just how thoroughly I'd outmaneuvered them. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, pulling out a stack of papers. "You're going to sign these, all of you. Full confession of the theft, immediate repayment of everything you took, and a legally binding agreement to stay away from my family's businesses forever. And if we refuse?" Camille's voice trembled slightly. "Then Thomas sends everything to the SEC. I'm sure they'd be very interested in Grant's creative accounting methods. And Reed." I met his eyes. "Those investors you scammed? They're very eager to talk to the FBI." Reed slumped in his chair, the fight draining from him. "You've been planning this all along. I learned from the best." I pushed the papers toward them. "You taught me how to play the long game, remember?" One by one they signed. Even Camille, though her hand shook with barely suppressed rage. As Thomas and the lawyer witnessed the signatures virtually, I felt no triumph, only exhaustion. "One more thing," I said, pulling out the divorce papers. "Full custody of Lila. Non-negotiable." Reed stared at the papers for a long moment. Can I still see her? Supervised visits. If you get help, real help, not just playing the victim." He signed without another word. As I packed up my laptop, Grant spoke for the first time. "What happens now?" I paused at the door. "Now? You get to experience what it's like to build something honest for once. To earn what you have." I looked at each of them in turn. "Consider it a gift." More than you gave my family. I left them there, surrounded by the ruins of their schemes, and went to collect my daughter. It wasn't the revenge I'd originally wanted, but it was something better, justice, with a chance for redemption. Mom would have approved. 6 months later, I stood in my mother's renovated office, watching the sunset paint the salon windows gold. The place hummed with the familiar sounds of hair dryers and quiet conversation, a symphony Mom had conducted for decades. MS. Sloan. Maria appeared in the doorway. Your 4 o'clock is here. I checked my watch, surprised. Send him in. Reed looked different, thinner, less polished. The designer suits were gone, replaced by a simple button-down and jeans. He carried a thick folder and something else I couldn't quite see. Thanks for meeting me, he said, hovering in the doorway like a stranger, which I supposed he now was. Lila's excited about the zoo tomorrow, I offered, keeping things neutral. The supervised visits had been going well, better than I'd expected. He nodded, then placed the folder on my desk. I've been doing some research about small business loans, specifically for salon expansions. There's a program that could help with those 3 new locations you're planning. I stared at him. Why? Because I owe you. More than money. He shifted uncomfortably. I've been working with a financial advisor, helping other people avoid the mistakes I made. It's good work. Honest work. And your parents? Haven't spoken to them since the divorce. They're in Florida now, trying to rebuild with what's left. He paused. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Sloan. Just a chance to do something right for once. I opened the folder, scanning the carefully organized documents. The research was thorough, professional, exactly what the business needed. Why now? Because Lila asked me something at our last visit. He pulled out what he'd been holding, a framed photo of Mom cutting the ribbon at her first salon opening. She wanted to know if her grandmother was a superhero because of how you talk about her. My throat tightened. What did you tell her? I told her the truth. That her grandmother built something amazing, and that her mother is even stronger for protecting it. He set the photo on my desk. I found this in my parents' storage. Thought it belonged here instead. I picked up the photo, remembering that day. I'd been 12, watching Mom shine with pride as she built her dream from nothing. Just like I was doing now. The loan program, I said finally. Is it legitimate? Completely. I'll send all the information to your lawyer first. No strings, no involvement from me unless you want it. I studied him, this new version of Reed, humbled but somehow more real than the polished salesman I'd married. I'll think about it. He turned to leave, then stopped. You know what the hardest part was? Realizing I had everything I needed already. A family, a home, love. I just couldn't see it through my own greed. And now I see clearly. He smiled sadly. Too late, but clearly. After he left, I sat at Mom's old desk, my desk now, and looked at the photo. The setting sun caught the glass, reflecting my own face over hers. Different women, different battles, same determination. My phone buzzed with a text from Dad. Mom squeezed my hand today. Doctors say it's a good sign. I smiled, touching the frame gently. Maybe Reed wasn't the only one getting a second chance. Maria knocked softly. The staff meeting's ready. We're discussing the expansion plans. I stood, straightening my jacket. Actually, I have some new information to share about that. From Reed's proposal? Maybe. I picked up the folder. But this time, we'll do it our way. The right way. As I walked into the conference room, I caught my reflection in the salon mirrors, not just Mom's daughter anymore, but my own person. Someone who could protect what mattered while still leaving room for growth, for change, for redemption. Even for those who might not deserve it. Because that's what real strength is, not just knowing how to fight, but knowing when to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. And we were just getting started.